Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about my Week 10 running back rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're covering all topics related to the running back position, beginning with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing running backs thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format in order to give us some more insight as to who has the most advantageous matchups or perhaps the most disadvantageous matchups and how that is going to potentially affect a player's overall upside going into this week. After we talk about matchups, we'll of course transition to our top 36 running back rankings, as I'll share my perspective and opinions and the statistics that justify the reasoning as to how I see the running back position stacking up when it's all said and done by the end of Week 10. Before we begin today's video, I will be talking also about the waiver wire video I posted yesterday. I have a couple adjustments in mind because, of course, we recorded that video prior to the Monday Night Football game. So, of course, Pat Freiermuth does gain a lot of value after that incredible performance. I think Justin Fields solidifies himself as a quarterback that could have value in the coming weeks after, of course, his Week 10 bye. Going forward from Week 11 and on, he could be one of those sneaky value quarterback pickups if you are in need of value at that said position. Outside of that, there was a little bit of rumblings this morning as to whether or not Alvin Kamara is fully healthy. I did mention Mark Ingram as the number 2. If, in fact, Alvin Kamara is going to miss any sort of time, Mark Ingram's value increases that much more. I did mention it yesterday. He's already rostered in about 38% of leagues. But for those of you who have Alvin Kamara, you need to make sure that you also have Mark Ingram on roster. And even if you don't have Alvin Kamara, you may be able to pick him up and go ahead and roster him. And if he's going to miss time, Ingram would have increased value like no other. Either way, that's a little tidbit I wanted to mention via the waiver wire. I want to thank you guys for continuing to support the channel. Feel free to click the subscribe button down below. Of course, our next goal is 60,000. So for those of you who have not yet already, we're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the season, whether it is rankings videos, waiver wire videos, Thursday night live streams, Sunday morning live streams. We'll have a strength of schedule video coming out this Friday. Of course, the hidden gems. We'll have trade targets, of course, coming down the line within the week. All of that available to you, help you win a 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. So if you're interested, be sure to subscribe. Also, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, I did draft a team at the end of yesterday's episode. And though this is the team I put together, getting Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, of course, Darnell Mooney, and Jimmy Graham. If Jimmy Graham catches one of those 2 touchdowns, of course, early in the game, he dropped one in the end zone, which was specifically on the dot, hit him in the hands. And then later on in the game, there was a penalty that pulled back his touchdown that he actually caught. If he scores that touchdown, Andrew's in the money. I'm telling you guys, if you haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, it's a great way to play fantasy football, whether it is playing the weekly contest, the Monday game, the Thursday game that's coming up between the Ravens and the Miami Dolphins, the Sunday Battle Royales. If you go ahead and sign up today using promo code Andrew, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. Again, you don't even have to play the weekly contests. You can play the pick'ems, picking over or unders on specific statistics, and you don't even have to play football. There's the NBA, college football, of course, NHL, a variety of sports. For those of you who are interested, again, the link is down in the description of the video, and use promo code Andrew today. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into our running back position for Week 10 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Do not forget, there are 4 teams on bye: the Houston Texans, the New York Giants, the Cincinnati Bengals, and of course, the Chicago Bears. Glad to see that David Montgomery is healthy and ready to go even prior to his bye week. When he comes back, guys, he is going to take the league by storm. Either way, do not forget, rankings are subject to change. As we progress through the week, there are going to be injuries, like I just mentioned, that are going to potentially pop up. And if, in fact, that drops the value of a player, then it will be adjusted accordingly. That's why I stream every Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, in order to help you guys set your lineups before kickoff with Kirikov. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about matchups. Let's talk about who has the easiest matchups going into this upcoming week. The thing that I noticed after I was putting this graphic together was that a lot of the teams that truly do give up a lot of points to opposing running backs are on bye week this week. The Cincinnati Bengals on a bye, the Giants on a bye, the Houston Texans on a bye. I mean, that in itself is 3 of the top 7 teams in terms of giving up points to opposing running backs. And though it is unfortunate that we will not have the privilege of using our respective running backs and kind of getting the advantage of those matchups, it's okay. We're going to figure it out either way. There are still other teams that are giving up a boatload of points. Of course, we have the New York Jets, who have given up 15 performances of 10-plus fantasy points already this season. to different running backs. We've seen the Detroit Lions. I mean, they're giving up, I think 15 total touchdowns this season alone. The Los Angeles Chargers, they've given up a boatload of touchdowns as well. Those are the three matchups that, regardless of who the running backs are, you always want to play them or have some sort of shares of them in that given week, because the matchup is just far too pretty to go ahead and pass up on. Now, in terms of some of the tougher matchups, we already know the New Orleans Saints, Pittsburgh Steelers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Buffalo Bills. They have been the best all season long, and that is not changing anytime soon. It does not mean a respective running back cannot score against them. It's just going to be that much more difficult, because they are certainly great teams in terms of stopping the run on a weekly basis. Now, speaking of stopping the run, I went ahead and also added another column of statistics, 2021 running back rushing stats. I pretty much compiled the total fantasy points that running backs have produced against defenses via rushing yards and touchdowns. And thus far this season, again, these are the amount of points per game given up via rushing statistics. Again, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, New Orleans Saints, Buffalo Bills, Arizona Cardinals, Pittsburgh Steelers, they are among the bottom of those teams, not giving up many points on the ground, which of course makes it extremely difficult for these respective running backs to find themselves value on a weekly basis when playing against those teams. Now that we've gone ahead and demonstrated these statistics, I'll of course be referring back to these as we progress through the video, but I wanted to go ahead first and foremost show you guys the week 10 matchups as we persist throughout the fantasy football season, who is giving up the most points, and hopefully this helps out as we continue on. All right, now that we've covered that, let's go ahead and talk about our top 36 running back rankings on the week, beginning with our number one. Again, I talked about it. The easier the matchup, the better it is, and the more comfortable I am starting a respective running back. Number one is Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings. I understand Dalvin Cook has not been the Dalvin Cook of 2019 or 2020 this season. Yes, he's dealt with injury, and even once he's come back, he really hasn't been able to find his stride in terms of being that top 3 overall fantasy prospect at his respective position, because he hasn't been able to score the ever-elusive touchdown as of late. He's coming off of a week against the Baltimore Ravens defense, which he had 110 rushing yards, and that's a great performance, but unless he scores that touchdown, it has been tough for him. Well, luckily this week, he takes on the Los Angeles Chargers, like we mentioned, giving up the third most points to opposing running backs. They have already given up 15 touchdowns to opposing running backs this season alone in their first 8 games. They've also given up 7 performances of over 70 rushing yards to opposing running backs this season. I mean, the stats are all there. Dalvin Cook should be able to take advantage of this incredible matchup and put together a great performance for us as our number one. Moving on to number 2, we have Najee Harris. Last night, Thursday Night Football, though he wasn't as efficient as he has been in the past, 22 carries, 62 yards, got himself a rushing touchdown early in that game, which pretty much solidified and saved his entire night. Also, we know he is a guy that is going to catch the ball out of the backfield. Obviously, wasn't asked to do as much last night because they were leading so heavily. It was just a matter of killing clock in the second half until late. But either way, he takes on the Detroit Lions, giving up the second most points to opposing running backs this season. They themselves have given up 16 touchdowns in their first 8 games to opposing running backs and are giving up 110 rushing yards per game this season. With Najee Harris being pretty much the only viable running back in this backfield, I know we saw a little bit of Kalen Ballage last night. It is nothing of a concern. It's just a matter of them managing his touches, continuing to feed him the ball. Pittsburgh's going to be in a really good spot this week as they take on Detroit. Moving on to Jonathan Taylor, coming off a 33-point half PPR fantasy performance. I mean, we know Jonathan Taylor is one of the best in the National Football League, but since week 4, he's been averaging 24.46 fantasy points per game and has been the number 1 overall running back. Of course, from weeks 1 through 3, it was really a transition with Carson Wentz trying to get healthy, trying to get acclimated to the offense, and of course, the offensive line trying to get healthy with Eric Fisher being brought in, Quentin Nelson obviously dealing with an injury, and now that they've finally kind of found their stride, Michael Pittman stepped up. The tight ends are getting themselves more and more involved every single week. Jonathan Taylor's just been able to dominate. Now, he takes on the Jacksonville Jaguars, and typically the Jacksonville Jaguars are not a good defense. And I understand, stopping Josh Allen and having the defensive Josh Allen completely go on a, hat trick of a day, sacks, interceptions, fumble recoveries. That's great. But they're truly not that good of a defense, especially in terms of stopping the run. The last time Jonathan Taylor took on the Jacksonville Jaguars, week 17 of the 2020 season, Jonathan Taylor had 30 carries for 253 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns for 37.9 half PPR fantasy points. Just put that in perspective. Now, though the Jacksonville Jaguars are giving up the 22nd most points to opposing running backs, it was just a couple weeks back where they were amongst some of the worst in the National Football League in giving up the most points. From weeks 1 through 5 of the season, they were giving up the 5th most points to opposing running backs. But in the last 3 weeks, as they played against the Buffalo Bills, Seattle Seahawks, and Miami Dolphins. Again, the Miami Dolphins have only just recently wanted to give Myles Gaskin the ball. Seattle Seahawks and Alex Collins just really didn't mesh well because that was a blowout, and they've been rotating a bunch of terrible running backs there, trying to hold on until Chris Carson can come back, and then the Buffalo Bills running attack doesn't exist except, for Josh Allen. So obviously the numbers have skewed in the opposite direction. I still think Jonathan Taylor's a stud, and that is why he's our number 3 in a great matchup against a division rival. Moving on to Christian McCaffrey, our thumbnail for today's video. You may have been wondering, where is Christian McCaffrey? Why isn't he number 1, Andrew? Well, last week he played 49% of the snaps, and we knew he was going to be limited to a capacity, but regardless of that, playing 49% of the snaps equaled 29 total snaps within the game for that respective offense. In those 29 plays that he was in, he touched the ball 18 times and had a total of 19 opportunities. Had himself 14 rushing attempts for 52 yards, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 54 receiving yards, 12.6 total half PPR fantasy points. Now, if you accompany that performance with a touchdown or get himself more involved, that is playing 90% of the offensive snaps, then we know Christian McCaffrey is still Christian McCaffrey, but they're trying to ease him in. And if in fact there's a possibility that they do not give him the full reins in the backfield, we're going to see more Hubbard or Amir Abdullah, then of course we might have a lesser upsidey Christian McCaffrey, but I'm not worried about it. I think Christian McCaffrey, similar to last week, as long as he is playing, he's in my lineup. There's nothing else that needs to be said. Playing against Arizona, I'm not worried about it in any sort of capacity. McCaffrey is a must play, and that is why he sits as our number 4 going into this week. Moving on to Austin Ekeler, our number 5. Now, Austin Ekeler is coming off of a little bit of an underwhelming performance, especially against a kind of advantageous matchup playing against the Philadelphia Eagles. But nonetheless, Austin Ekeler got the job done, finished with 9.7 fantasy points. This week, the Los Angeles Chargers, they take on the Minnesota Vikings. And just this last week, the performance that the Baltimore Ravens had as an entire team rushing the ball kind of just gives us a little bit of a hint or an idea as to how many points really Austin Ekeler could potentially gather this week, mainly because of the rushing yards that were just dumped on Minnesota. Besides Lamar Jackson's 120 rushing yards, we also experienced another 127 rushing yards from the combination of Devonta Freeman and Le'Veon Bell. When we put that all together, we have 247 rushing yards against that defense. If Austin Ekeler can line up and just run the ball consistently like he did last week, 17 carries, yes, 59 yards, but if he gets himself a touchdown, gets himself some more work on the ground and or through the air, Ekeler is top tier talent, and that is why he continues to be amongst the top 5 here. Moving on to our number 6, we have Alvin Kamara. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, there have been some reports that Alvin Kamara may have injured himself during that Sunday game against the Atlanta Falcons, and let's hope it's not serious. Fingers crossed. But if it is going to be serious and he's going to miss time or miss the week, so be it. We'll go ahead and adjust the rankings. Again, rankings subject to change like we always say. But going into this upcoming week, playing against Tennessee, if he's healthy and ready to go, it's quite promising considering Trevor Siemian is still the starting quarterback there, and it's not going to be Taysom Hill. Trevor Siemian targeted the running back position 12 times this last week, 7 going in the direction of Alvin Kamara and 5 going in Mark Ingram's direction. As long as there's going to be targets centered and specifically sent for Alvin Kamara as there are plays designed for him, well then by all means, Alvin Kamara is going to have this top tier talent value. But if in fact he's going to be injured, limited to any sort of capacity, then we might have to go ahead and drop him in the rankings. Otherwise, an automatic play as we typically know, Alvin Kamara is our number 6. Aaron Jones is our number 7. Now, in the last 2 weeks, we've seen 2 different types of Green Bay Packers offenses. One in which they didn't have any active, healthy receivers with Devontae Adams, Allen Lazard, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling out against the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday Night Football. And of course, they ran the ball effectively, and Aaron Jones had himself an incredible game. Should have had himself 2 touchdowns, but either way, a great performance. And in the following week against the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football, without Aaron Rodgers in the lineup, though they wanted to go ahead and key in on running the ball, they were not actively able to. Again, when you have Aaron Rodgers in the offense, the defense has to respect every inch of that field because Aaron Rodgers can dot up a defense and just put it on them. And if he's going to be there this upcoming week against the Seattle Seahawks, which the expectation is, though he is eligible to play as early as Saturday and join the team, he will probably be ready for Sunday playing against Seattle as they need to go ahead and pick up a win here against an NFC rival. Going into this upcoming week, I think, again, as long as Aaron Rodgers is in this lineup, Aaron Jones is that much better of a play. The team had themselves a good amount of carries for Aaron Jones, but they had to, of course, get A.J. Dillon involved, and they had to get the offense moving just outside of running the ball because truly after a while it was not working. Now, he was almost averaging about 5 yards per carry, and if we can continue to see that kind of momentum in that direction, similar to the game in which we saw against the Arizona Cardinals, then Aaron Jones is going to be next level, and I'm hoping that's going to be the case this week against Seattle. Moving on to Ezekiel Elliott taking on the Atlanta Falcons. They're giving up the 9th most points to opposing running backs, but many of us may be thinking, well, Zeke only had 11 points this last week, Andrew. Can we really trust him anymore? Well, I don't want to hear any of those narratives, guys. It doesn't exist. Ezekiel Elliott is a trustworthy running back, and I truly don't understand how, we could get so confused about the scenario here. They played against Denver. They were down 30-0. The game script did not involve Ezekiel Elliott running the ball in that second half. He's going to have a couple carries here and there, but 10 carries for 51 yards, yeah, that makes sense when you're down 30-0. When you're not able to find anything, and yes, Dak Prescott has to come in, throw a couple, touchdowns, a couple 2-point conversions along with it in order to save their given week. Of course, when you go into a matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, I think it's far more advantageous. I think they're not going to be in a scenario in which they're down 30-0, and the game script isn't going to kill the value of Zeke. I think he'll be fine. He's an automatic play, as he typically is. James Conner is our number 9. James Conner, he's been great all season. Specifically for fantasy, yes. Efficiency in terms of running the ball, not so great. But this last week, with Chase Edmonds going down with an injury early in that game, we saw James Conner, who typically only plays about 40% of the offensive snaps, jump to 77%. And with that kind of boost and opportunity, with Kyler Murray out, AJ Green out, and DeAndre Hopkins, and then, of course, Edmonds during the game, the playmakers for the Arizona Cardinals were certainly shorthanded, but my goodness, James Conner stepped up. 21 carries, 96 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 77 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown, and 37.8 fantasy points. Finished as the number 1 running back in Week 9. This season alone, he already has 11 total touchdowns scored. He's coming off of a game in which he had a season high of rushing yards, targets, receptions, receiving touchdowns, and fantasy points. Really, at this point, with Eno Benjamin being the RB2, I think James Conner is probably going to once again play 77% of the snaps. He's going to dominate the ball, and is that being the case, they play against Carolina. I think that's an advantageous matchup. And from what we've seen, opposing offenses kind of impose their will on that defense. They want to run the ball on them. And I think the Arizona Cardinals will certainly be doing the same this upcoming week, regardless of who's at the quarterback position. James Conner, an automatic play going forward with, of course, Chase Edmonds out, makes it that much easier to make that decision. Moving on to Darrell Henderson, our number 10. Speaking of injuries, Darrell Henderson left the game with an injury, but because of the fact, of course, the Tennessee Titans were winning by such a sizable margin, I know Darrell Henderson did return to the game. They did not keep him in the final drive of the game. Sonny Michel did vulture a touchdown because, again, they wanted to keep him healthy. They don't want to go ahead and worry about him. And if Darrell Henderson is going to miss time this week, we'll go ahead and adjust the ranking. But if he does play, as I expect him to, playing against the San Francisco 49ers, giving up the 8th most points to opposing running backs, let's talk about the last couple weeks. Besides the fact that James Conner just had a monster game. Of course, Khalil Herbert, 72 yards on the ground. Jonathan Taylor, 101 yards on the ground, scored a touchdown. Aaron Jones, 82 yards on the ground, scored a touchdown. There have been a lot of great performances against this defense all season long. They definitely know how to give up some points. And I think as long as we're getting back to the Los Angeles Rams, not turning over the ball, keeping themselves in the game plan, and the game script kind of favoring them, then we'll have a scenario in which, of course, Darrell Henderson will be in a position to run the ball significantly more and find far more value this week in fantasy. Moving on to Cordarrelle Patterson, our number 11. Cordarrelle Patterson has been a gift to the fantasy football community. It's the gift I didn't know I wanted, but I absolutely needed this season. Cordarrelle Patterson has saved so many of my teams, it's actually insane. Coming off of a week in which he had 6 catches, 126 receiving yards. Holy moly. Besides the fact that he only had 10 rushing yards on 9 carries, just putting that into effect. Of course, when you play against the New Orleans Saints, you typically can't run the ball very effectively. But, oh my God, his contributions in the passing game are unbelievable. And as long as that's going to continue to be a main focal point of this offense, running the ball with him, having him play special teams, getting him outside as a wide receiver, catching deep balls, Cordarrelle Patterson is just next level. He plays against the Dallas Cowboys defense, and though they've been good this season, as of late, they have kind of been falling apart. Gordon, 80 rushing yards and a touchdown. Javonte Williams went for 111 rushing yards. We'll talk about both these guys very soon as they had great performances. Dalvin Cook for 78 yards on them, and of course, Damien Harris, 101 rushing yards and a touchdown. Cordarrelle Patterson, whether it is on the ground or through the air, an incredible play going this week. We have number 12, D'Ernest Johnson. As of this morning, there was other information that was kind of made public to us that every single running back besides D'Ernest Johnson this morning, of course, Kareem Hunt's on the injured reserve, so he doesn't count. Every other running back in this backfield is currently on the virus injured reserve list. Now, if in fact they're going to see Nick Chubb miss this upcoming week, and D'Ernest Johnson is going to be the full-time starting running back of the Cleveland Browns, regardless of the fact that they play against Bill Belichick's defense. And, they're giving up the 10th most points to opposing running backs. I mean, that in itself is something to take into account. But despite the fact that they play against Bill Belichick and their New England Patriots defense, as long as D'Ernest Johnson is ready to go, I'm confident. I mean, that Thursday night football game against the Denver Broncos gave me all the confidence I could possibly ask for. 146 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 2 catches, 22 yards, 23.8 fantasy points. If he's available in your league and someone dropped him, by all means, he may be the number one waiver pickup if you need to go ahead and get a great performance here. If you're a Nick Chubb manager, think about it. All right, we've covered our top 12 running backs. We'll go ahead and move on to the RB2 category, beginning with DeAndre Swift. Now, you may have been wondering, where's DeAndre Swift? He's coming off the bye week, but unfortunately has a very difficult matchup playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, giving up the second fewest points to opposing running backs this season. Now, the stat that I wanted to go ahead and mention, because it really is the difference maker as to whether or not we are going to see DeAndre Swift have the upside game or be a minimal running back, is receiving work. It's receiving game or bust for him this week. Now, the stat that I wanted to specifically mention is in 8 games already this season, he has 57 targets, 47 receptions. In the 13 total games he played in 2020, he totaled that exact number. So he's already met that number with 5 fewer games. He is going to be a running back that could very easily catch the ball over 100 times this season, especially considering he's averaging about 7.125 total targets per game and 5.87 receptions per game. If you're going to catch the ball 6 times a game every single week, in a full PPR, he is without a doubt a top 12 running back. But in a half PPR, we have to kind of limit it to an extent because the rushing yard is not going to be there. But hopefully, if he is heavily utilized in the passing game, which we expect him to, of course, Jamal Williams hasn't seen much work there in a while. DeAndre Swift has such innate value because of that work. He will always have the upside of a touchdown, which gives himself the number 13 spot for this week. Leonard Fournette is our number 14, another running back coming off of the bye week, playing against the Washington football team. Now, the last time he played against the Washington football team, he had himself a great game, and it's very, reminiscent of the performances he's had already this season as of late. In the playoffs of last season against the Washington football team, 93 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 4 catches for 39 receiving yards. Why that is so reminiscent is because this season, obviously not including the game against the New Orleans Saints prior to the bye week, he's had consecutive performances in which he has had, 4 games, 4 rushing touchdowns, has been averaging about 80 rushing yards per game, and on top of that fact, has been catching the ball, 3.7 times per game, which is almost 4 times per game. It is literally just straight up almost those identical statistics, and as long as he's going to continue to keep pace with that, we're going to see less usage of a Ronald Jones or a Giovanni Bernard in a matchup which, in my opinion, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers should be dominating. I think, of course, Leonard Fournette, an automatic play, and our number 14. James Robinson's our number 15. I didn't expect him to play last week because majority of the conversation revolving James Robinson was that they're probably going to keep him out a week. Despite them doing so, I am confident because, despite playing against the Indianapolis Colts that are giving up the 6th fewest points to opposing running backs this season, there is a little bit of hope because of the way that they used Carlos Hyde. Carlos Hyde ran the ball a bunch. I think it was 20 plus times against the Buffalo Bills on Sunday. If in fact they're going to give their lead back a bunch of touches, well, we already know how it works. Opportunity leads to success. And regardless of how inefficient or efficient a running back is, a wider volume of opportunity is going to trickle and give you value. I think James Robinson playing against the Indianapolis Colts is not a worry of mine. As long as Trevor Lawrence is healthy and being able to air the ball out, similar to how Josh Johnson did last week, or Mike White, or the plethora of other quarterbacks that have dominated against that secondary, it will eventually open up the running game, and James Robinson will get back to his 15-plus fantasy performances as our number 15. Moving on to Elijah Mitchell. Now, the crazy part was we were all worrying. We were all sweating about the return of Jeff Wilson Jr. How is that going to affect my shares of Elijah Mitchell? And let me tell you, it is not going to at all. Despite the fact that Jeff Wilson was active, didn't play a single snap of football. Elijah Mitchell is a starter. It's done. It is solidified. Kyle Shanahan, with his actions, has already kind of given us everything we need to know. It is Elijah Mitchell or bust out of this backfield. Unless Elijah Mitchell is out, no one else is playing, and it's just going to be him. And we love to see that the fact that he was able to get himself 5 targets, 5 receptions for a total of 43 receiving yards. Though he wasn't able to get a lot of rushing work on the ground against Arizona, it had to do with the game script. It was a blowout. But either way, I think playing against the Los Angeles Rams this week, they're giving up, the middle of the pack, 16th most points to opposing running backs. In my opinion, I think Kyle Shanahan, as a Rams fan, as someone who has watched pretty much every single one of those games since the Rams have arrived here in Los Angeles, it is apparent that Kyle Shanahan has the number of Sean McVay. I mean, we haven't beaten the 49ers since 2018, whether it is, at home or away. So as of late, they've had our number, and I think Elijah Mitchell is going to be a huge part of that this week as they'll be running the ball very effectively. Moving on to Melvin Gordon III as our number 17. Melvin Gordon in the last 3 weeks has been the number 9 overall running back in fantasy. He has scored a total of 4 touchdowns and has been unbelievable. Plays against the Philadelphia Eagles, giving up the 6th most points to opposing running backs. Now, besides the fact that Kenyan Drake went for 69 yards and a touchdown, Jacobs, prior to leaving after the first quarter, 29 yards and a touchdown. Fournette had himself 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. Hubbard 101. We saw CH go for 101. We saw Pollard go for over 100 while Zeke was still in that game dominating. We've seen a lot of great performances, to say the very least. So what could we potentially expect from Melvin Gordon this week, coming off of a 16-point fantasy performance, even while Javonte Williams went for over 100 rushing yards? Well, he's going to continue to keep pace. If he's scoring touchdowns, he's getting the opportunity that we continue to see him have. I mean, coming off of a week in which he ran the ball 21 times, we typically don't see this offense put up those kind of numbers. It's typically like 14 attempts for Gordon and 14 attempts for Javonte Williams. But when you're running the ball as much as they did last week, mainly because they were up so much so early, it just kind of lended to more value there. But I think it'll kind of balance itself out. Either way, it's a great matchup against Philadelphia. Gordon should be great. Moving on to Damien Harris. Now, Damien Harris did sustain a head injury. Now, they haven't really said if it's a full concussion, and they haven't even, kind of designated whether he is in the protocol. Maybe that information will be, kind of divulged as the week progresses when we get to Wednesday, seeing whether or not he practices. But he played up until the last 7 minutes of the game. And, of course, the final drive of the game, it was Brandon Bolden in the offense for them against the Carolina Panthers. The game was practically over at that point, but nonetheless, if in fact Damien Harris is going to play, he's of course a start, despite the fact that they play against the Cleveland Browns, because this offense, regardless of who the starting back is, they always find value. Josh McDaniels always wants to have a lead back dominating, whether it is Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, who also went down with an injury, or Bolden, or J.J. Taylor. Doesn't even matter. They've always done this. As long as Harris is healthy, we're good to go with him. Otherwise, we'll move to Ramondre. If he is dealing with his injury and he's going to be out, then we go to Brandon Bolden. We'll see how it progresses. Moving on to our number 19, we have Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs coming off an 11.5-point fantasy performance, 76 rushing yards on 13 carries against the New York Giants defense. That should have been an even better matchup for him, but unfortunately, there was a lot of utilization of Kenyan Drake out of the backfield. Though, Josh Jacobs got himself 4 targets, 4 catches, the receiving yardage wasn't enough to kind of get him to that next level. Either way, a decent performance, and as long as you can accompany with a touchdown in the coming weeks, it'll be great. He takes on the Kansas City Chiefs, giving up the 12th most points to opposing running backs. And the reason why I am so excited about this matchup for Josh Jacobs is because in his career, he has had just unbelievably great games against this defense on a consistent basis. Going back to his rookie season, 2019, had himself 104 rushing yards in one game, 99 in the other against this defense. Going to 2020, we had 77 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and in the other game, 55 rushing yards and a singular rushing touchdown. We are going to probably see another performance in which, of course, the Raiders, who are so familiar with their division rival, the Chiefs, and are tied in terms of record, they're going to try to, of course, keep the ball away from Patrick Mahomes as much as they possibly can, establish the run, kill the clock, and dominate the game. They'll start and end that with Josh Jacobs this week. Moving on to Michael Carter, our number 20. With Mike White potentially coming back this week as a starting quarterback, we already have been given information that Zach Wilson is not going to return until he's fully healthy. Of course, he is the investment in the future. Mike White might get another opportunity here if, in fact, his wrist or forearm, whatever that injury was, is going to be healthy. And if that's going to be the case, well, his value increases immensely because Michael Carter has, of course, with Mike White, seen a lot of opportunity in the passing game. And though he was only able to put up 9.1 points this last week, mainly had to do with the fact that, of course, negative game script. They were coming back the entire time, and Josh Johnson was airing it out to receivers, tight ends, and, of course, Ty Johnson out of the backfield. We've seen Michael Carter line up, whether it is in the backfield, out wide, doesn't matter. If Mike White is the quarterback, he's going to have unbelievable upside. We saw him a couple weeks back at 14 targets. Those kind of numbers will once again show up if, in fact, that's the case. That is why we have him at number 20. Number 21 is Devonta Freeman, one of these players that I mentioned via, of course, the waiver wire. If, in fact, you need help at the running back position, we have already been given word that Latavius Murray did not practice today, and they play against the Miami Dolphins on Thursday. So in a short week, Latavius probably is not going to return, and Devonta Freeman, who has had 3 consecutive weeks of over 10 fantasy points for this offense and has scored touchdowns in every single one of them, is most likely going to be the lead back, coming off of a great game, which he had 13 carries for 79 yards, some work in the receiving game. The Miami Dolphins are giving up the 13th most points to running backs. Earlier this season, they were in the top 5. I think they can once get back to that number with Freeman and Lamar Jackson running all over this Miami Dolphins defense. Moving on to number 22, we have Darrel Williams. Now, look, every running back throughout all of these games have opportunities that could have led to touchdowns. If, in fact, their offensive lineman had blocked correctly, or if there wasn't a holding call, or this or that. If you go back and you watch some of these games, you can watch an Alvin Kamara 35-yard run get called back because Traquan Smith is holding on the outside, or it's Adam Trotman holding. There are a bunch of plays in which they're called back. And though we would like to have that value, at least knowing the opportunities there gives us some semblance of confidence. And knowing that Darrel Williams had 2 rushing attempts inside the 1-yard line, that both failed, is really painful to say the very least, because that's a 6-point swing there in that game. For, of course, his overall performance of 9.2 going at 15 points could have won you the week. But either way, I think Darrel Williams is the lead back. 19 carries for 70 yards speaks volumes. Derek Gore is no longer a deal. And if Clyde Edwards is going to come back, then so be it. We can adjust this. But for right now, if Darrel Williams is the guy, I'm all in on him playing against Las Vegas, giving up the 17th most points. I mean, we had another incredible week of Devontae Booker killing that defense. Darrel Williams, a great player, 22. 23 is Jordan Howard, another one of these waiver wire running backs. Again, this offense has looked completely different with Jordan Howard activated. I mean, coming off of the practice squad, this man has pretty much changed the entire Nick Sirianni offense, if you can imagine that. They are running the ball more than they ever have, and they've done it at a very efficient rate. And of course, whether it is Jordan Howard scoring this week, even Gainwell had a rushing touchdown. We, of course, saw the week prior, Boston Scott 2 rushing touchdowns, Jordan Howard 2 rushing touchdowns. They are running the ball and finding a lot of value down in the red zone. If that's going to be the case, they take on the Denver Broncos. In the last 2 weeks, Jordan Howard has finished as the number 10 and the number 13 overall running back in half PPR fantasy. I think he's a great play as long as he is the starter and activated this upcoming week. Moving on to Javonte Williams. Now, Javonte Williams was unbelievable. Now, I know that the Dallas Cowboys defense was dejected. I know they were kind of, not in the right frame of mind, especially late in that game. And Javonte really imposed his will, 17 carries for 111 yards. A lot of those yards was just him wanting it more. And that defense not wanting to, put themselves in harm's way, because Javonte Williams was a bowling ball and he was rolling over that defense. With some of these linebackers trying to come up and make arm tackles, that's not going to get it done. Javonte Williams is far more talented than that. This is a big week here because it's such a great matchup against Philadelphia. But once they come back from the bye, he's going to be even better as the schedule gets that much easier. Either way, Javonte, a good play at number 24. Number 25 is Myles Gaskin. Myles Gaskin's a little sketchy, mainly because if Tua's not there, the offense is a little bit downgraded. But with that said, Myles Gaskin coming off of a game in which he had a season-high 20 rushing attempts, only for 34 rushing yards, of course, that's not great. Had himself a rushing touchdown out of a Wildcat scheme, snapped it directly to him, he walked right in. No big deal. 12.7 fantasy points. 6 targets, 6 receptions. We'll take that. If we're going to see Jacoby Brissett target him consistently, then we're in a very good position, especially against the Baltimore Ravens. But if that's not going to be the case, and it's going to be a scenario in which, of course, they're inefficiently running the ball because this offensive line cannot open up holes. I mean, it's not even just the offensive line. If you go watch the end zone cam of this game, there are multiple scenarios in which Myles Gaskin is just, he's not picking the right hole. I mean, he could break out, he can cut back, and there are so many opportunities for him, but he's just not jumping in these opportunities. He's just running into the back of his offensive lineman. And hopefully, he finds value this week. He's so inconsistent. It's 1 week on, 1 week off. And I'm hoping this is not the off week, especially on a short week. But the good thing is Thursday Night Football for the last 3 consecutive weeks have been all about running backs. I'm hoping Myles Gaskin gets it done this week. Devin Singletary is at number 26. Now, though I did mention earlier in the episode when I talked about matchups that regardless of who is playing against these matchups, I always want to start them as long as you're playing against the Jets, the Detroit Lions, and or the Los Angeles Chargers. And though Singletary has the privilege of playing against the Jets, giving up the most points to opposing running backs, they've given up 10 plus fantasy points to 15 different running backs this season already. I mean, the Jets, they're giving up 34.7 fantasy points per game. They're giving up 4.7 yards per carry to opposing running backs, and they've given up 16 touchdowns to opposing running backs. Those three stats alone just make me want to play Devin Singletary, especially considering Zach Moss is dealing with an injury and questionable. Singletary has to have a great performance. I mean, the last time Zach Moss wasn't in the lineup and Singletary was there, week 1, had himself a great game, regardless of the fact that they played against Pittsburgh. I think this is a great opportunity here. Singletary, a decent RB3 with upside. Moving on to J.D. McKissic. I've talked about it in the past. J.D. McKissic is only good on even weeks. 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 16, 18. This upcoming week, it is week 10. It is an even number. And if you haven't noticed, in the last 4 weeks that he has played on even weeks, 17.8, 14.4, 15, and 13.3. Now he has the privilege of taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. And it seems to me that it is typically difficult to run the ball in Tampa Bay. And if that's going to be the case, well, they're going to be throwing the ball a lot with Taylor Heinicke, J.D. McKissic, and finding a lot of value there as our number 27. It's probably going to be the case. They have to air it out. And Antonio Gibson's not getting enough work in the passing game to constitute a downgrade for J.D. McKissic. So he's, in fact, in my opinion, ranked higher. Moving on to Alex Collins, our number 28. Without concrete evidence whether or not Chris Carson is going to return this week, I think, Alex Collins is most likely a good play. I mean, we have seen that the team is not shy of giving him opportunity. Since becoming the starting back, of course, that Thursday night game against the Rams, he's had himself in total touches, whether it is receptions or rushing attempts, 17, 21, 17, and 10. As long as he is getting these ample amount of touches, opportunity is eventually going to lead to success. And with Russell Wilson returning, they will have that many more opportunities of getting into the red zone, running the ball into the end zone, and getting Alex Collins a lot of value. I think 28 may be an undervalued portion, but it just depends on how this offense wants to proceed going into this upcoming weekend's game against the Green Bay Packers. Moving on to Antonio Gibson, our number 29. I'm so upset that Antonio Gibson just hasn't been able to get anything done this season. In the last 3 games alone, 3.4 fantasy points, 6.6 fantasy points, and 6.9. These are not performances that we can be proud of, and nothing that we can be confident enough starting, especially when we're talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have only given up 444 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in their 8 games this season to opposing running backs. That's only 55 yards per game. So if you're going to give 55 yards to an Antonio Gibson, for example, and he's going to put together at least 1 touchdown, then sure, he finds himself value. But if he's not able to find that ever-elusive touchdown, if they're not able to get down there, then he becomes a very underwhelming performer. And that is why we have him at number 29. The opportunity will be there, hopefully, with him healthy and no more Darrell Patterson, bugging him. But we'll see. We'll see how this offense wants to proceed. Moving on to our number 30, we have Ty Johnson. Now, Ty Johnson's coming off of 4 consecutive weeks of over 10 fantasy points. Now, you may be wondering, Andrew, why do you have him lower than a player like Antonio Gibson, who's putting up 6 points per week, when we've seen the consistency of Ty Johnson? My only concern is that in 3 of those 4 performances in which he's had 10-plus fantasy points, he has scored touchdowns. Touchdowns are super difficult to not only predict, but to score. I mean, the opportunities are not always going to be there, especially now that they play against the Buffalo Bills, giving up the fewest points to opposing running backs this season. With Michael Carter in the lineup, and of course him being the preferred favorite over Ty Johnson on a weekly basis, especially in the receiving game if Mike White is going to be the starting quarterback, I think Ty Johnson takes a little bit of a dip, but of course has himself a lot of value in a PPR. With only getting himself, 8 to 10 touches per game, he's pretty much in that similar role that Kenyan Drake is. And it's just a matter of whether or not the touchdown upside is there in that given week to give him the overall value. Speaking of Kenyan Drake, we have him at number 31. Kenyan Drake's coming off of a great week in which he was highly utilized in the passing game. 8 targets, 6 receptions, and 70 receiving yards. All while we saw 4 targets and 4 receptions go in the direction of Josh Jacobs. Now that they're both being equally adjusted and given value in the PPR game, their baseline of value increases. Now, with that said, of course, if he's touching the ball 10 times per game, he's going to be a sketchier play, despite the fact that they play against the Kansas City Chiefs, giving up the 12th most points opposing running back. He needs to be extremely efficient going forward. Otherwise, if the targets do end up falling off and or the production is not there in a given week, then we have inconsistency. And that is why he sits at the number 31 position, because we are not 100% guaranteed value out of Kenyan Drake. Adrian Peterson's our number 32. Like I mentioned, if you think Derrick Henry is going to be reborn in the body of Adrian Peterson. We're lying to ourselves, and that's exactly what happened. 10 carries, 21 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 1 reception for 5 yards, 9.1 fantasy points. That is pretty much the case. And going against New Orleans this week, it's touchdown or bust. Really, that is it. If Adrian Peterson doesn't score a touchdown, he's not having himself a great week here. There could be the idea of, revenge game. He used to play for the New Orleans Saints, and then he didn't like playing there, so he left. That was Alvin Kamara's rookie year, 2017. Obviously, Alvin Kamara in 2017 was already outperforming him as a rookie, but nonetheless, Adrian Peterson, if he doesn't score a touchdown, he is a very underwhelming play. Moving on to A.J. Dillon. Now, as the weeks have progressed as of late, he's gotten more and more touches, and he's been great. Going back to that Pittsburgh game, he had a lot of touches. Of course, against the Arizona Cardinals, he ran the ball a ton. And in this last week, had himself 4 catches, 44 yards, 8 rushes for 46 yards. When you're having yourself kind of accumulate already a total of 90 all-purpose yards, and then you're getting yourself the 4 receptions on top of it, that is just going to continue to increase its value. I think it's just a matter of what the game plan is going to be. If, in fact, we see Jordan Love as the starting quarterback, A.J. Dillon may have more value. But with Aaron Rodgers there, I think his value gets a little bit diminished, and that's why I have him at 33. We have Nyheim Hines at number 34. Despite the fact that Nyheim Hines is coming off an 18.8 point fantasy point performance, let's not forget he played against the New York Jets. They are the worst defense in the National Football League at the position. So Nyheim Hines, again, had himself a couple touches here and there that really went for big points. And outside of that, was relatively quiet the rest of the game. So with that all mentioned, he does play against Jacksonville. It is an easy matchup. I do believe, regardless of how many touches Jonathan Taylor is getting, Nyheim Hines will be active. It's just a matter of whether or not Nyheim Hines can get 10 points done with only 10 touches. You have to be extremely efficient, and it's going to be difficult. That's why we put him at 34. We have Mark Ingram as our number 35. If, in fact, Alvin Kamara is out or, as injured as we anticipate, then Mark Ingram for sure is an even higher play than number 35. But I have him here just in case Alvin Kamara is at a full capacity, because we know that Mark Ingram's coming off a week in which he had 14 touches, 5 catches, 9 rushing attempts, 8.9 total fantasy points, and someone we want to have on roster not only as a handcuff, but as potential value going forward. As the backup running back for the New Orleans Saints, he's already been more efficient than he has been as the starter of the Houston Texans. That should just kind of explain to you just how much better the offensive line is and how much better the offense is, regardless of the quarterback position, even with Simeon helping them out as of late. Mark Ingram's a good play, could be even better with an injury potentially holding out Alvin Kamara. The last running back option I wanted to mention is the other Tennessee Titans running back, Jeremy McNichols. Though he had himself 3 catches for 11 yards, again, wasn't able to get himself more than 10 carries because they weren't able to run the ball very effectively, and the game script pretty much just had them not having to pass the ball. You did not have to pass. They were killing clock, and when they were up, 21-3, 21-6 against the Los Angeles Rams, all they had to do was kill clock. Against New Orleans this week, may not have that privilege. Hopefully, Jeremy McNichols has more upside as a receiving back. All right, those are our top 36 running back rankings for Week 10 of the 2021 fantasy football season. I want to thank all of you for watching. Again, if you have not yet already, consider subscribing to the channel. We are on our way to 60,000. Again, click the like button down below. I appreciate that. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section as of these rankings. Who do you think is the lowest valued player that potentially could have top 10 upside going into this upcoming week based on their matchup and or the opportunities they may be given? Also, if you haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, use promo code Andrew. The link is down in the description of the video for those of you who are interested. Thank you very much. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the wide receiver position. Have a beautiful day, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.